So to go from there, after that, so after WCW and all that, as you're kind of transitioning and starting to see the behind the scenes things, the next thing, big moment in your career, you get an opportunity. And you and at that point, I think you came back. Did you come back and start doing ring posts again after WCW?
So
ring post the blog? Because I remember it getting really over to where like a lot of like the big blog writers were quoting you, and you were breaking stories.
Yeah,
that other people weren't.
So when I came back, luckily I was able to come back to Baltimore. I got my old job back at the Baltimore Sun. Had a quick stop working for the Baltimore Ravens for a few months because the Sun had a hiring freeze, and then as soon as the hiring freeze was off, I got back in there. So I only worked for the Ravens, worked for their website for like 3 months. But yeah, so I got back in. And so this is like 2001, 2002 that I'm back at the Baltimore Sun. The blog didn't start till like 2007, right? So by the time the blog, it was like 2007 when the blog started. And it did, like we talked about, before we went to the last break, it started really taking off. There weren't a lot. Now everyone has a blog, everyone has a podcast. There's all this stuff. Back then, there weren't many mainstream newspapers, mainstream news organizations covering professional wrestling. So the Ring Post blog, it got picked up. The dirt sites would pick it up whenever there was a story that I had or an interview that I did. So it really started to grow, and it got my name out there more and more. Now, Kevin Dunn, I'm sure everybody knows who Kevin Dunn is, worked WWE executive producer for years and years and years. He's a Baltimore guy, and went to Delaney High School, and he became aware of the blog because he read the Baltimore Sun for Ravens and Orioles coverage and everything else. It was his local news outlet. So he started reading the blog and became aware of it. And I had heard from other people in WWE that he was a fan of it, and that he liked that I was fair. That's what I heard. He's like, if you criticize us or you have a critique, it's constructive criticism, and you explain why. You don't just take cheap shots. Because, even at that point, a lot of mainstream media, as we talked about earlier, still kind of looking down on the business. So he's the one that really facilitated me getting an interview there. I also got to know Big John Gaboric.
Oh, yeah.
Right, from Tough Enough. Yeah. So John also was familiar with me in the blog. So we had this whole Baltimore connection. We all went to the same college, Towson State. Obviously not at the same time, but so we had this whole little connection there. And WWE was in town for a SmackDown, and he's like, John and I got a drink at the hotel bar afterwards, and he's like, hey, have you ever, did you say hello to Kevin Dunn? I said, no, I've actually never been, really introduced to him. Oh, come on, I'll introduce you. So he introduces me to Kevin Dunn, and Kevin once again said, I read the blog, and, you're fair and all this. And he said, have you ever thought about working for us? I said, well, my entire life.
Right.
He goes, yeah. He goes, we're always looking for writers, and I can put your name in there. So I actually jumped ahead here a little bit, and I'll tell it now. I said, well, Kevin, I actually interviewed for a writing job back in 2001, and you guys didn't hire me. And he goes, oh, well, things are different now, and I think, send me your resume, and so that's what put the wheels in motion. So quick story going back, after WCW went down, I reached out to the magazine editor. That didn't work. So then I thought, what? I've always wanted to get into the creative aspect of it. That's what I really wanted to do. And I knew, you would see on different websites, like WWE's always looking for writers and this and that. So I just sent a cold email to them saying, I'd like, how do I apply for a writing job? And they responded back, and it was basically, they wanted you to submit 2 sample scripts using WWE characters, and you come up with a whole arc of a program, from beginning to end, the matches that take place, the promos, the angles, the whole thing. And so I did that, submitted it, and they liked it to the point where they actually brought me in for an interview. Went to Stamford, met with the creative team, which at the time, Brian Gewirtz was on the team, and Paul Heyman was there, and Michael Hayes was there. Stephanie was in charge. Stephanie McMahon was in charge of the team at that point. I was only supposed to be in for one. It was in and out in one day. And Stephanie says to me on the first day, she's like, I want you to come back, tomorrow for the second half of our meeting. She's like, Triple H is making his comeback soon to TV. He had been off TV. This might have been when he had tore his quad. I can't remember specifically. But she's like, I want you to come up with a storyline for how we reintroduce Hunter and present it to the team tomorrow. I said, well, I'm only supposed to be here for one night or for one day. Like, I didn't pack clothes to stay overnight. And she's like, well, that's not a problem, is it? No, of course not. No, of course not. She's like, yeah, we'll have our driver, take you to the Stamford Mall and you can pick up some toiletries or whatever, if you need, because I have nothing. So I did that, I'm in my hotel room that night, and I'm coming up with a storyline, go back the next day, present it, the whole thing. And I'm thinking it kind of went okay. I'm feeling pretty good about it. Go back home. About a week later, they called me and said, thanks for coming up and, appreciate it, but, we're not going forward with you at this time. I was like, wow, I thought I did okay. So to me, that was the end of it. Like that, I got my shot.
That was in 2000.
That was 2001.
Right after WCW.
Right after WCW.
Okay.
I felt like, all right, how many people can say they at least had an interview for their dream? I got an audience with them. I took my best shot. Ultimately, they, and I actually asked them, when they said no, I said, well, can I ask why? And they said, well, we're really, your background's in journalism and you don't really have any creative writing experience. And, we're looking for like soap opera writers and this, I got that whole thing. I was like, okay, well, I wanted to say, well, you knew what my resume was before you brought me up, but okay. So I thought that was the end, the dream's over and that's the end. But then, like I said, fast forward 8 years or whatever it was, I guess it was 2010 that I had that conversation with Kevin Dunn. And 2011, they same thing, brought me up for the interview, whole 9 yards, and this time they offered me the job.
Well, that's an amazing story.
That is.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. I wanted to ask, you went up there for that first interview, and they eventually called you and told you, we're not going to go with you. Were you discouraged then? Did you think it was over? I'm never going to get this opportunity. They know who I am, or?
I was disappointed. I was very disappointed because I thought I got the sense that it went well, and it's like, man, like I didn't think of it. I really convinced myself that they were gonna want me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was disappointing, and I remember eventually I got to a point where I just okay, well I took my shot. Mm-hmm. I still got a good job here in Baltimore, and all that. So it wasn't like my life was over or anything like that. It's like, okay, took the shot, didn't get it. Part of me was, because I was doing some freelance writing at that point, I was writing for Wrestling Digest, which was a publication, I don't know if you guys are big sports fans, but very similar to Baseball Digest, Football Digest. It was a little, smaller magazine. And so I'm writing for them, and I thought, it was at a time when WWE storylines it was like 2000, they were starting to go down. So I'm like, wow, I can really... I'll take out my frustrations a little bit and write about how crappy the product is.
Yeah.
You don't want to hire me? All right. I'll point out how lousy your product is. You'll wish you had hired me.
I bring that up to you, Kevin, because it's kind of a personal story with me. Is I have a similar interaction with WWE where I was kind of put on the spot, thinking I was only going to be there for one night. Mm-hmm. And they were like, at the end of the night, they were like, so we'll see you tomorrow, right? And
this must be a thing that they do.
This is what I'm saying. I've never really shared this story with anyone because, it's a private story. But I as well was backstage in an extra role for a Raw when they were here in the Baltimore area. And, I saw a lot of my former colleagues that I worked with on the Indies. I saw a few people that I worked with right here in MCW Pro, D. Edwards. And the night's over, and I'm like, wow, well, that was my backstage experience at WWE. And Mark Carano, he's like, so we're in Norfolk, Virginia tomorrow. We'll see you there, right? And I'm like, yeah, you will see me there. And he's like, all right, excellent. Be there bright and early and make sure you're looking like you're looking. I was in a suit. Make sure you're looking like you're looking tonight, and maybe we'll have something for you. And, it was kind of like, I was like, am I being put on the spot to see how dedicated, how far I'll go? And it sounds like that's been kind of par of the course since 2001. My story was in 2017, so
I also have a similar story, and my first interaction was through Kevin Dunn as well. Actually, was how I got into wrestling. Was Kevin Dunn being a high school friend of a manager where I was working at a bar, but I was an extra as well. I was with Godfather, and
oh wow, I'm this footage.
the same thing happened, and I had it was arranged through Kevin Dunn by way of being a high school buddy with my manager at the bar, and I went, did my thing, was on the Ho train that night, and then Tony Gurria came in and said, "So we'll see you tomorrow in DC." Oh, okay. I mean, I got to work, but okay.
Same.
Like,
yeah.
And I didn't know, and like I said, this was my very first time. My very first time in a ring was, at the Baltimore Arena in front of all those people, and so I didn't know either. And I was like, "Yes, I will be here tomorrow." Okay, great. And so it sounds like that might be something they do.
But then when it doesn't go anywhere, it's we're in the nature of my in 2001, where it's like, hey, good job, but not good enough right now. Where you then discouraged to the point, well, that was my WWE career. I tried, and they just don't want me.
Yep.
That's definitely kind of the feeling I was having to reveal, but here I am at the MCW cast, and things aren't going so bad, if you ask me.
Right.
And then when you got that job, how long were you there writing for?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
Right. Man,
2011 to 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny because when I got that second interview, I was much more. I was older at that point, and I was just like, if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, I didn't have all my hopes and dreams wrapped up into it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I don't want to go into too many details about, numbers and stuff like that. But that interview, I just felt like I really nailed it even more than I did the first one. I'm like, they're going to offer. I just was really sure. Mm-hmm. And so they did. I got the call, and the human resources guy, the recruiting guy, said, we want to offer you the job, and here's what we're going to offer you. And they gave me a figure. I said, okay, well, let me talk to my wife, and I'll get back to you. And it wasn't insulting, but it wasn't enough to get me, again, to now I've been at the Baltimore Sun, how many every year's it's been, do the math, but, and now I'm in management at the Baltimore Sun. I'm a middle manager, and I'm making a good salary, and I've got a family now, and I'm like, I'm not leaving unless it's more than that. So I was perfectly comfortable, and I told him, after I had talked to my wife, and I said, no, I'm going to have to, man, I really appreciate it, but I'm going to decline. Mm-hmm. And I think he was taken aback because I don't think they hear no a lot.
Probably not.
Right.
So he's like, oh, okay, can I ask why? And I told him why. I said, money wasn't quite what I thought it would be, and, there's certain factors in my life. I have family here, and I have an elderly mother here who's, a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple hours go by. He calls me again. He's like, hey, Stephanie McMahon would like to speak with you directly. He goes, I know you've made up your mind and everything. He's like, but she just wants to reach out to you. He's like, are you open to talking to her? Of course. Sure. Yeah. He goes, okay, she'll give you a call in a little bit. And so then Stephanie McMahon calls me. And she's like, I totally understand your concerns and everything. She's like, but we'd really like to have you here. And she gives me this open-ended question. She's like, what would make you happy? What would it take to get you here? Give me, come up with a number. I'm like, is this for real? My head's spinning, right? I'm like, okay. So she's like, yeah, call us back tomorrow. And okay. So again, talk it over with my wife. And I said, all right, I'm not good at negotiate. I hate buying a car. I don't just tell me how much it costs and give it to, you know what I mean? I hate haggling. So I've never negotiated before, but I'm like, all right, I'm going to just I'm going to put a big number out there. But I'll take this number from what they offered me and what I'm coming back with. If they can come in the middle, I'll take it. I'm going to say, I'm prepared, I'll say yes.
Right.
So I talk to her, I give her my number, here's my number, and I was shaking as I told, because I thought she's going to be like, who the hell do you think you are?
That's
right?
called the big ask,
Is that the big ask?
The big ask.
So I'm
like, a number higher to ultimately get to something else.
I'm thinking she's going to be like, who do you think you are? Right? But she's like, okay. She's like, we'll get back to you tomorrow or whenever. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the next day, Human Resources calls me again and says you know, we want to offer you the contract and or offer you the job. And it was the number that I asked for.
Wow.
Wow.
So I was like, well, I'll take it. You know, so
Yeah.
I took it. Yeah. So it was like, man, I was on top of the world at that point. But I went into there with my eyes open because I know there aren't a lot of lifers there on the writing team. I know there's a lot of
Turnover.
Of course, I went in there thinking I'm going to be one of the exceptions and I'm going to stay there, you know, forever and all that. But, you know, I lasted 3 years, which I saw people come in. I saw people that didn't last 3 weeks.
Wow.
I saw people that didn't last 3 days.
And